So this is John Dawson's T2, Rockford T2. Needs to get out of the way. This video is about the quad coils that we got from Concept. So it looks a little confusing because that's a lot of fucking wire. I understand that. This is each coil on here, because it's quad, that means 4. Each coil on here is 2 layers. So it winds from here and it goes zzz down, that's 1 layer, and then it goes zzz up, and then that's 2 layers, and then it taps off, and that's 1 coil. Okay, so now the great thing about these coils is they're really compact, and it's all copper, so they're kind of on the heavy side, which is really good for daily subwoofers, which is what I really like about them. The other thing that I like about them is that, okay, so this is for Charlie in San Francisco. Charlie has 4 of these, and he needs to achieve a final 2 ohm load. Okay, so one of the things that I do is I remove 2 layers. Okay, and then what you're left with is a coil about not fully half, but about half the weight. And so sometimes that causes a problem. So, and his gap will fit all 8 layers. So what you can do is just not hook them up. You also don't want to terminate them. Okay, so there's a couple options. Is you keep the layers on there for weight, for mass, and it's a much easier way to add the mass in there. The other great thing is that having those extra layers on there also provides what's called thermal mass, meaning it allows it for more abuse, more heat absorption, because there's more material there to absorb the heat. So that's the other thing. The third thing that I thought about, something that Dan Wiggins and I had talked about way back in like 2006, which was, and Dan has, I'll post a Dyer tech page from the Internet Archive, which was, Dan wrote a white paper on how you can use so his paper's on dual voice coils. So it sort of applies to this, is that if you have a coil that you're not using, or you don't want to use, or you have a special application where you can add a resistor, or even some sort of, I mean, in some cases you can add an L pad, but typically L pads are not very high power. The biggest ones I've seen are were on MCM Electronics for like 100 watt. But the idea is that you can vary the open coil with a resistor and create a damping characteristic. Because if you short it, what happens is it creates a break. Meaning, and when I say break, I'm talking about B-R-A-K-E, brakes, like brakes on your car. So it creates what's called an electrical break. And you'll see that on some, the first time I saw it was on a JBL coil. It had a coil of wire up here that was isolated, meaning there was no terminals or anything like that. And the reason for that is if the coil comes down far enough, what happens is the gap sees that coil and it immediately stops because it's a short, and it helps stop the coil and keep it from bottoming out. So that's one way where you can use it electrically. It's not really used anymore because most of the time you just sort of gauge the spider to do that. It's also expensive making those coils, so that's another reason why people don't really use it anymore at all. But the other idea that I had with Dan was that what if you took one of the coils that's open or not being used, and you were to use a wire and connect it. So the problem is that you would have to use tinsel leads or some sort of, you could just use a single tinsel lead and add it. But what you do is you pull this lead off, or you terminate it to some tinsel, and it comes off. And what you do is you attach it to a heat sink. So in this case, you could actually use something like the frame as a heat sink, and you just basically drill and tap a little hole and put the bolt on there, and then it uses the whole frame as a heat sink. Now again, you can only use 1 wire from 1 coil. You don't want to use 2, because if you use 2, then you create a short. Again, you don't want that happening because then your coil won't work. Okay, so but heat it travels on conductors differently, has different sorts of properties, but it almost seems like it's electromagnetic, but it is just thermal. But a heat can travel thermally through a conductive material pretty well, and so which is the idea behind something like what was it called, ferrofluid. Ferrofluid is it's just oil with tiny shavings of iron, And the iron is heat conductive, and so is the oil. And so the idea is to sink away the heat from the coil. The problem is that if you get any real excursion, it makes a fucking mess. B52, I remember I saw, God, this was in Hawaii. I saw probably 50 to 60 B52 woofers blown and just messy as hell because they put ferrofluid in there. Nobody really uses ferrofluid anymore. The last company that I saw use ferrofluid was like either Dynadio or ScanSpeak, and that was in a tweeter, and they had just come out with, I think, the Revelator tweeter, which was a ferrofluid-free version. And what they did to compensate was just put a much bigger magnet on it, a much stronger magnet. And so that's a better way to go. Ferrofluid is kind of not great. It makes a mess, and it doesn't do, it can cause damping characteristics to the coil, meaning like a resistance, a moving resistance. And of course, in a speaker, that you don't want that. So back to Charlie's question, how do you remove 2 layers? In your case, I would say don't use 2 layers. So, but what you can do is use a meter and go around and figure out which one of these is a coil. So you just, whatever, you take this, you use your multimeter, and I use the beep characteristic on it, which is like a diode tester, but it gives you a sound whenever there's a connection. And so you touch those and it goes beep, okay, that's one coil. And so what you would do is you basically just cut it off right there. And so that way it's a non-issue anymore. And then what you're left with is 2 coils. That's what you would use. And because this is a quad coil, it's a quad 1 ohm. So the final 2 coils that you would use, you would want opposing sides, 180 degrees. So like this one, like say you kept this one, then you would want the one that's on the opposite side, because that's the way that, what do you know, spiders are set up. So, but in this case, I would actually have you wire them, hardwire to the positive and negative in series. And then that leaves you with 1 lead. And this is how I do it. So what that enables is that you have this 1 lead. Now you just, boop, you double those up. So now you have double the leads on 1 terminal. One of the biggest failures on subwoofers is the tinsel leads. The tinsel leads are not beefy enough. Or, as Tilo used to put it, if you're burning tinsel leads, you're doing it wrong, which is a great way from his perspective to sort of control abuse. Is you put tinsel leads that are not, they're not prone to be abused. Me, I know you guys are going to abuse them, and so the parts don't cost me any extra. And if I wire it this way and it helps the woofer last longer, all of a sudden I look like a fucking hero, even though I'm just a regular dude. I just build woofers different than, say, a big company does. But I tell you what, these are going to be trend setting. People are going to start taking notice and building speakers different. Typically, one of the reasons why they don't do this or the other, somebody had asked about why don't brands do like what I was doing, which was the dual half ohm and then hardwire in series, so that way you have all 8 layers in the gap. And a lot of that really just has to do with laziness and what's available in China. Most of these companies are what's called Me Too brands, where they just, they look at Sundown and they go, me too, I want that too. And then so they go to China and they go, I want this too. And of course China goes, we can't do that because that's Sundown's. And they go, okay, well, something very similar that doesn't have Sundown stamped on it. And they go, okay, yeah, we can help you very much. So, and the same thing that goes with, real quick, sorry, I know I'm a little squirrel on these subjects, but the same thing goes when if you ever start ordering coils from a company like, say, Precision Econowind. If you say, hey, I want the JL Audio 12W7 coil, they'll say, we cannot make that for you because that's their coil. Now, if you take your measurements and you give them your measurements and you tell them what you want, and you can say plus or minus this tolerance and plus or minus, whatever, and you can use copper or whatever, round, flat copper, whatever, then they'll make that coil for you. Okay. Or what John used to do, John Van Ree, what he would do is he would make a suggestion for me. And so I would get a coil that looks very similar, but oftentimes I would change, like say they can put black ink on the the spun lace Nomex, the Nomex tape. And so that's actually different. Or, and you can also get it printed with your part number. So on like the 13W7 coils, I would put Dub 7 or whatever, or something like that on them. And so that helps me identify them very quickly as well. But one of the most intimidating things about ordering coils real quick is that you got to understand what the sheet says. And I would love to post a sheet publicly so you guys could look. it's easier to take someone else's sheet and then just modify it, because there are a lot of fucking options that you can put on there. A lot. Like the whole page is filled with just stuff that just, it's still, even to me, I don't know everything on there, and that I would just rely on John to make suggestions for me. And so, but anyways, that's for ordering coils. And God damn, I keep not getting to this. This is what I want to get to. So right here, when you're pulling layers off of a coil, what you want to do is look for these outer layers. See how that's on the very outside? And so is that one. So now if you look around here, like this one, that one is under layers. So you don't want to pull that one off. That one's not the outer layer. So you want to always start with the outer layer. I wanted to show you a different example, but this one's fine. And you sit there and unwind it, and then it'll come off. Now on these, they're a little tricky because it's intertwined with a second wire. So you'll get down to the bottom, and then you'll see that it'll stop, and you got to pull on another wire. Well, what it's really pulling on is the opposite side. So you got to pull that side off too, and then you can actually do them at the same time. So you can also do, if you grab them, the right ones, you can do them at the same time. Now this just happens to be this coil. Typically most coils are 4-layer, and you don't have that problem. Let me get this one. This one is the infamous TC Sounds 3 HP coil. So let me look at this one. So see, this one actually is the second layer, or I should say third layer. And so you don't want to pull from that side. Now this side you can see very clearly. See that? Focus. There we go. Those are clearly on the outside. And so you would actually start with this one right there. And so you pull that off. This is the positive. Remember, positive is always on the left. And you pull this one off, and it'll wind down, wind back up, and then it'll come off here. And that's the end of that coil. And what that ends up looking like, sorry, I don't mean to make you sick by moving too quickly, but I saw one of these the other day that I had experimented on. Here it is. Here's actually two of them. So this is the original TC Sounds 3 HP, which is a round wire coil with 4 layers, and it's round aluminum. I went ahead and pulled off 2 layers. Now, now what you have is 2 layers, 2-layer coil, which is not horrible, because if you take a 4-layer coil, like say a dual 4, and you wire it in parallel, guess how many layers it has? 2. Now they're extra beefy because now you've doubled up the wire, but you still only have 2 layers. Here is a Mac version. This one was the, I think this looks like the dual 1. And went ahead and took off 2 layers, I think to get it to fit something, because I still wanted the length, which is 70 millimeter in this case. And then what you do is, what I do anyway, I don't want to say you, but what I do is I then pull this off and I rotated it around to 180 degrees, which is usually about right there. And so that way, again, how I showed you with the spider, you're 180 degrees off from one another. And so that way, one lead will go here, like that'll be your positive, and then a lot of times I'll mark the positive on the spider, and then I won't mark the negative because it doesn't matter. So, and then the negative gets terminated here, and so then you'll have one terminal on each side, which is exactly what I did to Marlon's 18s. So, and so there's 1, 2, 3, 4 leads for the positive, and 1, 2, 3, 4 leads for the negative, which is super beefy. And I had them vertically stacked because when you space them, here, this is a real good example. So this was the prototype sample that I got, and I said I really like this spider because one of the things that they engineered into it was that when you, right there, you cut at that crease, then it's good for 3-inch. And 3-inch by 8-inch is a really, really popular spider. But I was getting in all these 2.5-inch coils, and I said I want a 2.5-inch by 8-inch. That's the one that I did I was doing the Sundown Extremes, right? And then I ran out of Sundown motors, and I started buying from Lord of Base. And so then we called it Sundown called it the SA, and I called mine the Vato. So the Vato Extreme. So the Vato was the 2-slug version, and the Vato Extreme, here they are. Here's ones that aren't done. So this was the Vato Extreme, which is the triple stack. So, but now I got my machine shop guys doing them. We're going to have a ton of those, but this was the final spider that we went with, and we double stacked the leads, as you can see, glued and stitched. And then they got the loops, which is really cool too, because sometimes you need a loop to fasten to or whatever. So that's it. That's what I wanted to show you about unwinding coils. And when working with the quad coil from concept, Again, I just call it from concept just because that's where I got it from. Normally I would never tool up this, but it turned out to be a really great and flexible coil. If I was to tool this up again, I would do a longer former, like the 3 HP, so I could use it with TI frames. Even though it is only a 40 millimeter coil, you can still use it in the TI frame. It just won't have the excursion capability, but it still makes it pretty awesome. But I think that was it. Oh, these are $36 shipped, CONUS. And they're actually pretty heavy. But that's what you want, because you knuckleheads use these fucking stiff spiders. So I think even a 12 with the lower to base, this is I think the single layer, the red one. You get a pretty low FS on a 12, like in the 20s, I think upper 20s when using this coil. But anyways, love you guys. I will talk to you later.